For people who aren't aware of you or your work, how would you describe what you've been working on and what you've been doing over the past few years?
The past few years has been really focused on this new project called the Geography of Prosperity. And it's both an index and a new book that ranks 250 American urban areas, the largest ones, based on five key dimensions of long term resilience. The core thesis around this is that we are measuring city health the wrong way. We are so hyper fixated on growth of the population, growth of the economy, that we're not paying attention to some of the underlying factors that decide whether a city will thrive or struggle in the coming years. And we released the index, the first iteration of the index, this spring at South by Southwest in Austin. We'll release a second version next spring in 2027, also at South by Southwest in Austin. And my book, The Geography of Prosperity, a new map of the American dream, will come out the fall of 2027. So quite a bit has
Mm,
been focused around those things within that project.
hmm I got onto your Instagram, and in your bio, you have a link to where you can see where your city ranks. And as I mentioned, I'm in Denver, so I think I was in the low 50s of a
Yeah,
ranking there,
Denver did pretty well. I mean, some challenges around water stress, which I think you all know
yeah,
very well.
especially this
But
year.
for the most part, yeah, especially this year. But you're not the only city that's facing this challenge.
hmm
But it is one to keep an eye on because these cities that have had really explosive growth in the past few years, Denver being one of them, continue to grow. And there's only so much water to go around.
hmm
This will impact your quality of life in the mid to long term.
Why do you think it was necessary? What's the benefit, or what should people take away from your work? Like, why are we ranking these cities, and how should that filter down to the layman, the person who actually lives in these cities or near these cities?
Well, it depends who the audience is, right? So there are multiple audiences that can actually use the data, use the insights that we're producing. The first and foremost is me and you, everyday citizens who are living within these cities or making a decision about whether to move or stay. This is a diagnostic tool, first and foremost, and it allows you to give a read on where your city might be doing very well or very poorly. The one thing to note about this is that, yes, we do a ranking of 1 to 250, and people will say, oh, you're chastising the ones at the bottom and celebrating the ones at the top. That is not the case here. That is
hmm
not what we're attempting to do because even the number one city in the country still has room to improve. We should constantly be improving the places in which we live. Now, if you're an individual citizen, you're going to make a decision, about your place at some time in your lifetime.
hmm
And place planning, this place decision, if you have the luxury of being able to move and to afford a move, is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make in your life because the zip code in which you live is the single greatest determinant of your long term success, both in terms of your health and your longevity, but also in terms of your financial health and well being. So, the ability to be able to identify those places that are doing very well is a bit of a luxury item. Now, for those people who don't have the luxury of moving, and there are plenty of people that are in that box, the diagnostic tool gives them a sense of what they can focus on to fix within their community. It should be an empowering thing for people to use. Policymakers should be using it as well because this measures alignment across these five dimensions of population, climate, social cohesion, automation readiness, and governance and foresight. But also, as we've learned, there's incredible interest from the investment community, the business community, in
hmm
understanding where to place bets in the coming years because the old map that we've used doesn't work quite the way it used to.
hmm
And chasing the sun, chasing cheap real estate, the math doesn't quite add up on that as much as it once did because of things like extreme weather eating into our budgets in these areas.
Let's take somebody who has the desire to move and the financial capacity to move somewhere. Should they just look at number one on the list and go right there? Or should they look at trends like cities that are on the rise?
It depends what your calculus is. Now, if you're looking to make money, if you're looking to invest in a place, moving to a place like New York City, which sits at the top of the list, might not be the right choice. People can still make money in New York, but it's very expensive to get in on the ground floor, at least in real estate in that city. That being said, there are other cities in the top 10 that are still relatively affordable. And it's very important to people understand when I say relatively affordable, because it depends on where you sit on how affordable that place actually is. But they have the foundations in place that to do really great things. A city like Durham, North Carolina comes out at number 2 on our index. It has a really solid foundation. In fact, the best balance score of any city in the country. But even in a place like Durham, you can expect some growing pains in the coming years because people are moving there. And when people move to a place that doesn't have the right infrastructure built, primarily around transportation, those little headaches can turn into big headaches in the coming years. In fact, I met a developer down there just a few months ago, and he said, my commute used to be 15 minutes, and now it's about 20. I said, oh, well, I guess that's not so bad unless you think of it through the lens of that's a 30% increase in time you're spending on the road. And his jaw just dropped. So it's how you understand and interpret the data, I think, that will help you make those better decisions. Now, some people will say schools are the most important thing to me, and they're willing to take a hit on some other areas in the index because they want the best thing for their kids. Some people will say, I simply want the most affordable place. They'll look through the lens of affordability first and foremost. But if we're looking at really long term durability, are these places built to last? The top 25 or 50 cities do pretty well overall. The ones in the middle might have the greatest opportunity for investment, though.
Mm, mm. How did you come up with the things that you're using to rank and categorize these cities, and what are they?
Yeah. So the genesis for this actually came because of conversations across the country. My first book, called The Super Age: Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, was an examination of how the country writ large is aging at a very rapid pace due to increased longevity, primarily within the boomer cohort, but also a pretty significant collapse of birth rates nationwide. And by the end of this decade, there will be more people over 65 than under 18. A full 20% of our population nationwide will be over the age of 65. So, as I was traveling across the nation on my book tour, speaking in large audiences, which is a big part of what I do, expressing this data so that people can understand how to make informed decisions. Um, People keep coming up to me and saying, we're a little concerned that we don't have the right data for what's coming. We're concerned about climate. We're concerned about these population pressures. We're concerned about AI and what it could do
Mhm.
to our economy. And it was actually at South by Southwest in 2025 when a local county councilman came up to me and said, I can see the cranes in the sky. I know we're doing well economically. The housing's being built at an incredible pace, but I feel like we're on shaky ground. And I don't have a measure that really expresses this. And when I took a look across what was actually available in the marketplace, everything was very disparate. You could find the groups that were doing population studies. You could find the organizations that were doing really incredible work around climate and climate risk. You could find the organizations that were really doing the right assessments around what AI's impact would be on local economies and American industry. But there was no one doing a cohesive thesis, a cohesive understanding of how these different things would actually interplay to create a future that could be bad or good. And because of that, this siloed thinking was not giving people, whether they be individuals or investors or even those policymakers, the right data to really understand what the future was going to bring. We wanted to change that. We wanted to give people another insight into what the future may hold. And the response to this thing has really been overwhelming
Mhm.
because the interest has come from across sector, media, industry, private equity, of course, those policymakers first and foremost, but also economic development organizations are really trying to figure out how to tap into what the future may hold. And the index helps get you there.
Somebody like myself and my wife, where I'm 29, she just turned 26. She's in the middle of medical school, second year med student. We got moved to Denver for that. We'll have to move wherever her residency is. It doesn't feel like we can weigh a lot of our opportunities against something like your index, because we just have to take what we can get. Housing's so expensive everywhere anyway. We're in the middle of schooling and doing these things and trying to build our life together. It doesn't feel like we have so much control outside of what is just given and what we just have to do. How is it that these policymakers can use your index to better improve the life for people who feel like we're at the younger age, we don't have access to these affordable housing, to these things like that? What should they be looking at when it comes to your index to help improve things for the younger demographic, for people my age and still growing and rising?
Well, I think that you could take a really close look at the way we do our population measure as a
Mm,
policymaker to understand whether or not your city is building for the future.
mm,
Because in that population measure, we're looking at age mix in particular. And if your community is trending older, that is a signal of one of two things. One is that there's no room for younger people to come in.
mm,
Two, there's no opportunity for young people to stay.
mm-hmm,
Either one of those really needs to be addressed if you want to create a dynamic population within your community. And we're seeing this across suburbia right now because the market, as you've rightly said, has priced a lot of people out. Young people like you that want to have families or do have young families simply can't afford to move to the suburbs anymore into the suburban houses because boomers still occupy them. Now, some people have, couched this as boomers, hoarding wealth. And there might be a degree of truth to that because boomers do own the vast majority of real estate. But everyone's experiencing this affordability crisis right now. So a boomer that wants to move out of that home that they bought, that has all of this equity built into it, they'd have to sell it, and then they'd have to move into a property that's likely smaller,
mm-hmm,
that would actually be better for their needs, but they'd be erasing a lot of their gains. So in many ways, they're
mm,
kind of stuck in their homes. And that's part of the story that we never tell is that we say boomers have gobbled up all the wealth, gobbled up all the real estate. And on the paper, that actually is true. But in reality, many of them are stuck too. They're stuck in these big homes that they can't really offload without taking a massive hit to their future financial stability. So, what
mm,
can cities do? That's always the big question, right? What can they do? Well, cities across the country are really reforming their building codes right now to allow for more multifamily, allow for denser use across city real estate, both in the public and private hands, because we're starting to see some cities free up public lands for private development. And
mm-hmm,
this will help take off the pressure. We do need more housing right now, but we do need more housing in very select markets. Your home city of Denver, or at least the city that you occupy right
mm-hmm,
now, certainly went through this challenge. And in fact, the suburbs in Denver are just booming right now. But the city's really working on addressing their housing challenges too. The issue is that we all want things done like that. And things don't happen like that. First of all, you've got the challenge of certainly rewriting building codes and dealing with NIMBYism, not in my backyard for people who don't know that term.
mm.
And you've got a lot of different actors that have a lot of different incentive structures. So it's not something that you can easily just switch and do overnight. But the will to do it has to exist in a city. The vision and the foresight to build for what the future is really necessary. And we can pick that out in our governance and foresight score, understanding whether or not a city is really committed to the future and understands what's coming.
You mentioned government and foresight score. What are the other rankings that make up this index for the
So
cities?
there are five in total. So the first
Mm-hmm.
is population renewal.
Okay.
So are you creating a population or keeping a population that is dynamic? Dynamic in terms of its age structure, dynamic in terms of its births, dynamic in terms of its immigrant population. And the immigrant population is an important one these days because we've effectively turned off or at least halted the spigot of immigration into this country. Some cities will really struggle with this new challenge. The second is climate and extreme weather. So not only is your city exposed to climate change or the downstream effects of extreme weather, but are they prepared to manage the change once it hits? We look at a lot of different things in this measure. Water stress, I mentioned earlier, is one of those things. Extreme heat days are another. We also took a look at insurance claims, weather related insurance claims, because those are the immediate impact, the immediate downstream impact of extreme weather events within a city. And some cities have better regulation due to their state governance than others around protecting people. The others that don't have those same kind of basic protections, people are seeing increases in their insurance prices of 30 to 40% a year, which is really astonishing. And people don't have that priced into their equation. So when that happens, they have to make a decision. Do I stay or do I go? Do I further allocate resources to a place, not knowing where the top is for that expense for insurance? Um, the third is rather is automation readiness. And I think of this broadly as a workforce readiness assessment because we are
Hmm.
moving into the automation economy. Plenty of people hate the term automation and AI readiness, and rightfully so. There's been a real turn on the technology, or at least the infrastructure needed for the technology across the nation right now. We're not measuring data centers. We're not
Hmm.
measuring data centers. Let me be clear on that. We're not measuring that. What we do take a look at, though, is whether or not there's good access to broadband, whether or not the educational infrastructure, the knowledge ecosystem within a city is really one that can help transition the workforce for when this technological change happens. So think of it kind of like the Industrial Revolution. Wouldn't it have been great if we had all of these different tools to help transition cities to the Industrial Revolution? It would have been pretty fantastic to have those
Hmm.
things in place. We didn't. We kind of had to stumble through it. Um, Governance and foresight is the other one. Really looking at whether or not a government is working for its people, whether or not they have a long term vision, a plan. And the last one is social cohesion. That's the glue that holds us together.
Hmm.
And we look at some measures that the people wouldn't necessarily expect for social cohesion if you're not in the social sciences. Like we're looking at things like access to parks, walkability, sidewalks. All of those things contribute to a really strong community at the end of the day. And if you've ever lived in the suburbs, you know there aren't many of those things around. And if they do exist, you typically have to drive to them to get there. We want to see places that will effectively encourage people to spend time with one another. Because when you do have those tight connections, those opportunities to see people, they create what we call weak ties, which can lead to stronger ties that can help buttress us against isolation and loneliness, which is an epidemic happening across the country right now.
Hmm. Hmm. I just got done a couple weeks ago with a conversation with James Ellis. He's a PhD and he specializes in the loneliness epidemic and helping people do that. And he's exactly that. He talked about the pandemic and then going from remote and the lack of what he calls like minor connections, just those like day to day where you interact with coworkers or go to the grocery store or things like that where you have those just minor connections that lead to those major connections, and how less than one let the majority of the US population has less than one person that they can rely on in a time of need. And it's pretty astounding and unfortunate that that's the world that we live in, especially with as it's trending to even be more lonely with the rise of AI and with what we have going on. So those.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I was just going to say the one thing that people push back on, they say, "Oh, the suburbs aren't bad for loneliness." The suburbs are really pushed us to loneliness in the first part. I always
Mm,
take issue with that assumption that the suburbs were somehow great.
mm,
There are good suburbs and bad suburbs. There are those ones that are close into cities. They're effectively
mhm,
small towns that surround a city that
mhm,
are connected with transportation. They have a main street. People live fairly dense. That's a good suburb. A bad
mm,
suburb is one that is fully car dependent. And there's a term that we use called 15-minute city. Um, that's been politically charged somehow. I think, like everything these days, that it's some kind of socialist experiment to get people to force people into living in cities. But the reality is just, can you get to what you need on foot within 15 minutes?
Mm,
Um, and if you live in a dense area, whether that be a small town where there is a tight main street, or a big city like Washington where I live, I can do that. I can
mhm,
be 15 minutes to my doctor, to my barber, to my grocery store. All of that stuff exists within a few blocks from my home. And because of that, I'm more likely to get out and engage. And I'm
mm,
more likely to really invest in my community and feel part of my community, because I see the people that live here every day. And I have
mhm,
to talk to them, whether I like it
mhm.
or not.
I remember growing up, we moved when I was in 5th grade or whatever to Southern Illinois, in a very rural, very distant, and very small town area, and I remember being in a home that was just by itself with a lot of land around it, and just growing up thinking, "Oh, man, I wish had a neighborhood, I wish I had kids that I could," and because you see that in the movies, like, kids with their bikes going over to the friend's house and knocking the doors. I remember growing up, like, I moved to this new area, I didn't have any houses nearby, and I always wanted to have that growing up so I could have those friends and those connections, and then now as I'm, have my own family, I'm like, I want a home with land around me, and I don't want any
Yeah.
neighbors that close. So it's really funny to see that dichotomy and just having to make that decision. I'm curious, how did you s write your first book on, population decline as well as the aging population, and then transition to this work that you're doing now? What's the correlation and the relation of your those 2 areas of work?
Well, the correlation is really the through line is population and demographics, because
Mm,
both exist in both books. Um, the first book really was based on 20 plus years of experience working
mhm,
with AARP, which is the largest membership organization in the world. It also represents people over the age of 50 in this country as an
mhm,
advocacy organization, and an organization that sells products and services to people, including insurance. I spent quite a bit of time there building out their portfolio with organizations like the OECD in Paris and the World Economic Forum, as well as a number of different national governments, trying to figure out what all this demographic change means for the world and how we could apply that to the US context.
mhm,
Because the US is kind of in the middle of the demographic curve. The
mhm,
countries well ahead of us are places like Japan and Italy, in fact, most of Western Europe. But there are also nations that have really caught up quite dramatically to us and are starting to depopulate already. And the single biggest one is China. China was a relatively young country 30 years ago, and now China is a relatively old one. In fact, China loses about 2 to 5 million people a year from their total population count. And some will argue that that's because of the one child policy. I disagree with that. The one child policy helped it along, but typically, low birth rates and depopulation happen because these things in society change. We move into cities, we become less dependent on a spouse, more dependent on government services versus being exclusively within a community. Uh, that's how the math changes. But that one child policy kind of hypercharged things for China. And this shift in population was an important thing to understand, the aging and the depopulation, because you have rabble rousers out there that say this is the end of the world. Elon Musk always talks about this being the end of Western civilization. I don't believe that. There is no prescribed number on how many people we need to occupy this planet.
mhm,
No one has decided that. And
mhm,
plenty of great things happened when the world was a lot smaller.
mhm,
And just about 100 years ago, we were about 6 billion people smaller than we are today. So we can do a lot with a little if we want to. The challenge, though, is that our economy and our measures are built around growth. We always talk about GDP, we always talk about economic growth. And if you don't have customers, these businesses will struggle to grow. They will struggle to grow at the rate that they're accustomed to, and they have been accustomed to as the global population exploded in the 20th century.
Mm,
Those days are coming to an end. Those
mhm.
days are simply coming to an end. And will it be a bad thing? I think the verdict's out. But if you're a capitalist, true and true, this is Armageddon for you.
Yeah.
But if you're not, you can look at this from a more holistic perspective and say, actually, things are quite good. I
Mhm,
look at the aging population kind of as our parachute. And if we build a world that's a bit more inclusive for them, if we extend working years past 65, maybe 5, maybe 10 years to match our longevity gains, extend those consumer lives a bit longer too, the consumer products that people want to sell, not just the stuff that's for healthcare, um, they're like a parachute. They'll help us kind of ease into this new reality of a world that grows very slowly for the next couple years and eventually starts to plateau and decline
mm,
in the near future, most likely within our lifetimes.
mhm,
There will be parts of the world, though, that will continue to grow at a very nice clip, but the vast majority of the world will start to shrink.
mm. I mentioned earlier I spoke recently with Paul Moreland, a demographer over in the UK, and the basis of my conversation with him and with you is trying to understand the effects of this declining population will have on people my age and younger. I'm trying to understand that for myself and helping my peers in that way. And he mentioned, like I asked him, and you kind of addressed it in the opposite, but I asked him if, yeah, this population decline, is this a bad thing for people my age? Because intuitively I hear that, I'm like, more resources to go around, everything's going to be a little bit smaller, and he's of the opinion that it is going to have a negative effect. He says, with the larger population comes larger access to more people mean more innovation, more great ideas, next Shakespeare and the next Einstein, all of these things. And you mentioned you skew the other way, is like, there is no set number. Maybe we can do a little bit more with
There is
less.
no set number. And think about when those Einsteins or those Shakespeares were at their prime, the world was a fraction of the size.
Mm,
Great minds will still bubble to the top. The challenge is making sure that we continue to have some type of pipeline
mm,
of people. Um, what people often miss about the demographic question too is that we solve for a lot of things with our birth rate, with our lives.
mm,
Kids used to die at a 50% rate in this
mhm.
country, and that was just about 100 years ago, when the likelihood of survival into adulthood was 1 out of 2. Now most
Crazy.
kids survive into adulthood. Like, we're not throwing them into factories. They're not dying of cholera, at least not yet. They're not being sent off to war. So, because of that, you don't need to have as many kids because the risk of losing them is far lower.
Mm,
You also have just a delay that's happened, and this is an economic piece too, where men and women are putting off some big life decisions, like purchasing a home, like you
mhm,
suggested. The average age of a first-time home buyer 40 years ago was 29, and today it's 40. Like, that's a
mm,
big shift. And past 38, I know women hate to hear this, it's just the scientific term, a geriatric pregnancy. Like, it's harder to have babies after
mhm,
38. It's statistically harder to do,
mm,
and there's a shorter window for having them rather than starting in your 20s. Um, so all of these shifts are kind of swirling around us. Armageddon, though, is not what's coming. A slowdown of the economy most likely will. I think that's something that we should prepare for.
mhm,
The economy will also find efficiencies in places that will allow it to grow.
mhm,
Technology will increase the economy's size for at least a period of time. So, how much will that hit us on the head? Hard to say. It's
mm,
hard to say, but it's not all gloom and doom. It's not all gloom and doom. The bigger gloom and dooms are coming because we cannot adjust our systems to meet the new realities. So, by the end of this decade, just around the end of this decade and the start of the next one, both the Social Security Trust Fund and Medicare in the US are going to run out of money.
mhm,
There is no fix, there's no serious proposal to fix it. Um, So these older adults that were really betting on having a Social Security payment each month will likely see their monthly payment drop by 20 to 25%. That's a
Mm,
significant, steep drop for these people, especially because most of them are not well saved. At the
hmm.
same time, their insurance costs will go up and they'll have to spend more out of pocket. So they're getting double whammied. What will we see as a result of that? We'll see more older people on the streets, homeless. That we'll
You
see
mentioned,
that.
yeah.
That's statistically going to happen, and that's pretty grim. And that us as younger people, you more so than me, uh, we will have to decide how much of that check we're going to carry,
Hmm.
because the future will not be negotiated exclusively by boomers, despite what people say of our gerontocracy today. The future will be negotiated across generations.
Mm. I mean, the inception and creation of Social Security wasn't paid into and then paid out. It was paid out and then the next generations pay into that to cover the previous generations. And with the what you classify as super age, more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18, there won't be enough people to pay into that, and hence
Yeah,
it's
and
failed.
that's been a slow bleed for decades. Basically, we used to operate as a pyramid, a population pyramid. That's how society looked. So you had a ton of
Hmm.
young people at the bottom, very few people at the top. The math around a program like Social Security made a lot of sense because it was easy to take a lot of this capital and move it up to
Hmm.
here. Very few people. We've inverted that. The pyramid looks a bit more like a square now or a rectangle than the traditional pyramid. And in some parts of the world, in Japan in particular, and China now, that pyramid is kind of turned upside down. So, because of that, we have to rethink these systems. We have
Hmm.
to rethink them quickly, or they will simply break under their own weight. That is a bigger risk, I think, than the economy collapsing as a result of there being fewer kids.
Mm. I mean, you mentioned it's not Armageddon for us here, but could the argument be made it is Armageddon for some places like Japan, like South Korea, where,
Well,
for every 100, grandparents, there's only going to be 11 grandkids. That's a very steep decline. Are they in a much worse position than us?
yes, I mean, China's in a much worse position than
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
There's no debating that. China has, very much a command control economy that is directed by the state. The state's data is not great. And because of that, they've made decisions, they've made assumptions in their 5 and 10 year plans that did not take into account the rapid decline of births in their country. They were building because local governments were incentivized. They were building for a future that was never going to come.
Mm.
And one of the statistics that I always love to share with folks is that China overbuilt their housing by 65 million units. Now,
Whoa.
just to put that in context
Yeah.
here for folks who are for playing along here and keeping score, that is the entire population of France.
Yeah.
So the entire population of France could effectively move to China and be housed overnight. This has caused their entire housing industry, where most Chinese have their investments held, more so than in the market like we do here, um, to lose money. And this has really slowed down the economy overall. One of the cascading impacts of this, too, is that young people, and we see this here too in America, this is not necessarily unique, but young people in China are effectively rejecting that work ethic, the Chinese work ethic of work hard, get ahead. They
Hmm.
call it lying down. Um, they don't think the future is built for them, and they're not going to contribute in the same way as a result. I still think Gen Z in particular has a lot of gusto and entrepreneurship in them, but it's clear they're frustrated with the way the world has been built and what they're inheriting.
Mm. I haven't had the opportunity to go to China. I know one of your indexed 5 categories is the automation readiness.
Hmm.
I've heard that China is, with their declining in population, they have increased their automation and their, robotics and things like that far significantly than us over here in the US. And that will kind of offset the population decline. Have you heard? Are you
That
interested
is
in that?
true. I mean, Japan has done that as well.
Mm,
Korea too. They've been much more embraced automation and artificial intelligence than we have. You can, and I've been working in and out of China and Japan for the better part of 20 years now, and there were robots and monitoring devices that were early AI on the floor in Japanese nursing homes 10 years ago.
mm,
Those are just things that we're starting to even think about here in the US. The use of robots, too. Japan has always been ahead of us on the use of robots, particularly humanoid robots. And that has certainly been picked up by China as well to some comedic results if you're on social media when these poor machines go awry. But they are, I think, a bit ahead of us on that curve because the market pressure is there. They need more people. They don't have more people. So they have to bring in machines to augment those tasks. The question is, so what? So where does that go? And I think this is where you get to the economic question because I have yet to meet a robot or an artificial intelligence that can purchase the can of Coca Cola and consume it. Like,
mhm,
they might be able to solve some of our labor woes, but they'll not be able to solve some of our consumer woes, specifically in consumable products category. There are
mm,
plenty of futurists out there, though, that say, in fact, that AI and these automation, these intelligences will actually create their own economies. They will actually be spending dollars or yen or yuan or euros and bolstering these companies, effectively creating a microeconomy at scale of consumption. But those are going
mm,
to be on digital products.
mhm,
Um, will that do something for the economy writ large? Probably, but this is really completely uncharted territory. So, anyone suggesting that they know what this is going to do is really just making a guess, and it's
yeah.
barely an educated one because it's like introducing the wheel. Like, oh my God, like this, what can this thing do? Oh, it turns out it can do everything. Will that be the same for artificial intelligence as an economy? I can't tell you right now.
I remember listening to an interview that Elon Musk was doing. I can't remember who he was doing it with. It was probably about 6 months ago. And like I mentioned, my wife's a second year med student. She wants to go into surgery and be a surgeon. And he literally addresses that. He's like, I would hate to be in medical school right now. He's like, we're gonna have access to humanoid robots that can do surgery better than the best surgeons and it's free healthcare. And my wife and I were looking at each other. It's just so much uncertainty right now and so much unfortunate, you know, pandering towards to like my wife wanted to be in medical school since she was like 6. This is what she's wanted to do, and right now she's scared and uncertain that that won't be
Yeah,
available to her.
I don't think we're hitting that. And I'm not sure we'll hit that in your wife's lifetime. Where robots are simply doing the surgery for us, although the technologies are improving dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, my father was testing remote surgeries
Mm,
where the doctor would sit in an office, 20 miles away from this where the surgery was actually being done and would operate the robot from a distance.
mm,
Plenty of surgeries are monitored that way now, where you've got a tech sitting in a room monitoring surgeries remotely across multiple operating rooms. So it's less about losing the person, it's finding efficiencies in the person and expanding what the person can do. And that's what I try to have people like embrace a bit with artificial intelligence because if we say it's all gloom and doom, it's kind of like we're manifesting it. This is going to
mm,
be the end of all things. But if you think about it as an efficiency tool, a way to improve upon the work that we already are doing, then we can embrace it a bit more, or at
mm,
least understand how it'll operate in our lives. So I'd like to tell people, like say you're an office, say you're an average person and you spend about 20% of your day or so on tasks you just don't like to do, very
mm,
redundant operational tasks. Well, if you're an office of 10 people and 20% of that work has now been eliminated because of artificial intelligence, you only need eight of those 10 people in the office
mm,
or you only need that in your office right now. So yes, there will be some people who will be made redundant as a result, but are you going to be able to get rid of the whole office? That's not going to happen. That's
Mhm.
not going to happen. So much of what we do, what we produce, is based off of feeling and understanding the market in a way that artificial intelligence just can't do yet.
Mm.
The human touch that a doctor can offer is bar none, especially around having those conversations before you go into surgery. That
Mhm.
counseling, which happens as part of the process of getting better. Um, it would feel pretty dystopian if your only engagement for your healthcare was a machine.
Mhm. Mhm.
But on the other hand, I love the fact that I could pick up my phone and if I need to speak to a doctor now, I'm with One Medical. I can get somebody on the phone immediately, do a quick triage, and decide what I need to do, whether make an appointment in the office or head to the emergency room. That has really improved my life.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's something my wife has brought up as well. She's like, yeah, people don't seem to want to interact. They seem to want the human touch, especially when it comes to these serious operations or those things like that, where they want to be able to talk to somebody face to face, which is comforting in that aspect. We mentioned earlier the failing of these social security systems that we have in place. How can we address that? What can we do there?
The problem is we had an opportunity to do this 20 years ago. We had an opportunity to do this 40 years ago. And our politicians are not incentivized to make long term choices, especially hard ones that come with some real political realities. And some would argue this is because we have effectively an entrenched political class in America now, with people serving 30, 40, 50 plus years in Congress or the Senate.
Mhm.
And tend to agree with that assessment. If you have to take a risky political bet, um, you're going to lose your job. And the
Mhm.
number one goal of any congressman, I don't care who would want to argue with me on this, it's fact here in Washington, their number one goal is to keep their job.
Mhm.
Full stop. So we had all these opportunities to fix it. We chose not to fix it. And as a result, the closer we get to the event horizon, which is now within 5 years for Social Security, within seven, I think now for Medicare, the harder it is to fix. So will the system simply collapse and then we'll be forced to renegotiate? I think that's where we're heading because the likelihood of getting any kind of deal here before 2028 is null. It is null. Um, I think most people, most leaders in the Republican Party would be happy to see both programs die. So they're not motivated to change it. And let's assume Democrats take control of the House and the Senate. They will not have a supermajority in either house. It is very unlikely the president would move on anything like that either. So then we're pushing into 2029. 2030 is that date. 29, 2030 is when Social Security runs out of money. So we're literally running into the wall head on
Mhm.
right now. What could we do to fix it? We effectively need to have a grand renegotiation of the social contract in this country. We need to decide what government is and should be doing and how
Mhm.
much of that service, government is a service, it's not a product, how much of that service should be handled by government or outsourced to the private sector. There are plenty of people that would love to see all of Medicare simply outsourced to the private sector. Most of it is already,
Mhm.
mind you, but they'd like to see all of it. They'd like to see all of our contributions to pension be fully outsourced to the marketplace. I think that's foolish. Government should be, to some degree, a large degree, a guarantor of security, especially in later life when we can't necessarily take care of ourselves.
Mhm.
But some of that negotiation is going to require some hard choices, and there will be people that get caught up in it in a bad way. I think about just from like an urban perspective, when Detroit went through his bankruptcy in 2013, there were losers in that bankruptcy, and one of the biggest losers in that bankruptcy was the Fireman's Pension Fund,
Mm.
which the city decided to, basically release its obligations on. Uh, those men lost their pensions. Those men and women lost their pensions as a result of that. So
Mhm.
there will be pain in this, and people need to buck up for it because if we're really a civil society, at the end of the day, we're measured by how well we take care of our young and our old. And
Mhm.
if we're not willing to take care of either, what are we here for?
We had the opportunity to fix it about 20 years ago. What would that have looked like in that ideal scenario?
Well, the ideal scenario, you'd have kind of multiple things happening, and
Uh-huh.
there are far better versed policy experts on this than me. But you need to have a multi-angled approach to this. Part of it is taking into account income over the course of a lifetime. Part of it is taking into account longevity projections, the amount of years that we might live depending on our health, our zip code, et cetera. All these things that factor in. Simply raising the retirement age, which is something that is always thrown around. I often say it's like taking a sledgehammer to open a walnut. You would never do it. It's not the right tool. So by simply raising the retirement age to 70 or 75, that's going to hurt a lot of people, particularly those who are low income, particularly those who are working in manual jobs that cannot extend their working lives easily. But should there be certain classes of employment that maybe we extend the working lives for? Sure, absolutely. Where people can continue to contribute to pension, to their Social Security accounts.
Mm.
Professors, for example, have incredible longevity in their careers. Lawyers, certainly politicians, have a long longevity in their careers. Any kind of quote unquote professional class employee, worker is going to have much more longevity in their careers. They're going to have much more longevity on average than somebody who is blue collar or working class in this country. So, should working class people be able to retire at 65 like they do now, or just about 67? Yeah, I think they should. But should there be a graduating curve upward for people who are in higher income groups? I would suggest that would be the way to handle it too.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not a one size fits all. It is
Yeah.
not a one size fits all. And that's why it's complex. Because if it was, we'd probably have fixed it by now.
Mhm.
Um, but it's not. It's
Mhm.
not simple. And there's a lot of interest groups around it too. Like
Yeah.
everyone wants their pound of flesh. Everyone wants to have their voice heard. Um, and getting old's expensive. It's not
Mhm.
an easy thing to pay for.
When I talk about this and think about this, to me, it seems like the most likely scenario with this inverted pyramid that we have is it's just gonna fall more and more onto the younger demographic, the working class demographic to pay more into it, and that's just gonna exacerbate the other issues we've been talking about, like housing and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is when things get too far out of whack, bad things happen.
Yes.
Um, so we hope that doesn't happen. You know, could cause a slowdown in the economy. That's a bad case scenario, not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario would be some form of revolution. Um, that's hyperbole, but it's not without precedent that
Mhm.
when people feel aggrieved or disenfranchised in a major way that they can't get ahead of,
Mhm.
that they revolt. And we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. We live in what um, one social scientist called a bubblegum dystopia right now. We are very much distracted by the digital world. Technology keeps us entertained enough that we don't necessarily, take to the streets. But if the math gets too far out of whack, if people really struggle to own a home, or even just the basics of putting food on the table, those create the conditions for revolution. And that could be something as crazy as an armed one, or it could simply be more civil, and be a revolution at the ballot boxes where people are thrown out of office. We have not had the right levels of political participation in this country to really have change. We have not had them. Far too few people vote, especially in the primaries, which has contributed to polarization, the most extreme sides from both political parties. And the gerrymandering of districts has only added to this, making districts safer and safer. We've effectively locked these people into office. And most of these people are decent human beings, by the way. Like, no
Mhm.
one goes to Congress and says, I'm going to screw everything up. That's not their intent when they go there. Most of them are going there to do better for the country. But you get into kind of the grind of the place, and it's hard to make change. It's hard to make change for a nation unless there's a pressure point. And we've lived through pressure points before where there has been radical change. the stock market crash of 1929, the greed of the Gilded Age, that all led us to the creation of, the most progressive era in American politics.
Mhm.
Uh, though we're not there yet. We're not there yet. The pinch isn't strong enough yet. The
Mm.
second it gets there, though, everything moves very fast. Everything
Mhm.
very moves very fast, and that's not like today and tomorrow fast. That's like in a year or two or three or four. Like that's the speed of time we're talking about here. We're not there yet. We're
When do you
close.
think we'll get there? Yeah.
There's too many variables. There's
Yeah.
way too many variables that, I mean, I think that you know I think seeing old ladies on the street is gonna really, really shock people.
Mhm.
Um, I think
When
it's
we
really
do
happening.
get there, do you think it's gonna be clean? Do you think it's gonna be messy? What do you think
I
that
think it's
pinch
gonna be
point
very
will look?
messy.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be very messy. I think it's gonna be very, very messy. The Great Depression was not clean. It was a
Yeah.
very, very messy, very, very desperate period for the country. Um, it was awful. I mean,
Mhm.
I had grandparents that grew up in it.
Mhm.
And I think if you did have that tether to somebody who lived in that period, you got a sense of how bad it actually was. You got a sense of why the society, nearly the full majority of the society believed in government intervention, believed in government action, because things had gotten so out of control with wealth inequality, no guardrails on the marketplace at all. Uh, you know, eh, Companies that gobbled up all of the resources, we tried to buffer against these things, but they creep back in, and we're at that period again. I mean, there's a reason why people refer to this as the new Gilded Age, because a lot of the hallmarks are here. That period, between the two world wars, man, it sure feels a lot like that right now, where you've
Mhm.
got incredible wealth creation and concentration amongst the upper income groups, more and more people falling into poverty out of the middle class. You've got global instability kind of ticking up. Nationalism is starting, or has been at least for a decade now, festering underneath the surface. Xenophobia as well. And of course, all of this new tech, like I don't know why people think that the 1920s were in like a period of like technological expansion. Like that's still the industrial age. That's all these new things that were being built. Radio, brand new communications tools came online. Like that was a very disruptive period. We're in that now, but putting like a time horizon on it, uh, because there is still an opportunity to fix it, would be a bit silly. But if we stay on the current path 5 years, 5 years
5
until
years.
something, pretty awful happens. We can still pivot out of it though. There's still an opportunity to pivot out of it, but we're not doing that.
Mhm.
We're not doing that. In fact, it seems as though government is making things worse. I want to offer this though because I think it's very important that there's a bit of a level set here, because what we hear as being like the end of the world isn't the end of the world yet. Like a lot of things have to push us into this period of like abject poverty. We're not there yet. Um, we're living in a period where there's a lot of complaining, and a lot of it is grounded and true. But at the same time, in many respects, we're living kind of in the zenith, the pinnacle, the golden age of mankind as well. Like we live long lives on average. The vast majority of us have a home. The vast majority of us have a job. Is it paying enough? No. Is the housing too expensive? Yes. Is my access to care harder than it was before? Yes. But there's a bit of a tension, a bit of a balance that still exists there. Could that tip in the other direction, one way or the other? Yeah, it could, and it could happen very quickly. If things continue on this path of this erosion of purchasing power, the ability to kind of get by, I'd say 5 years is when we start to see some bad stuff happening.
So what should people in my age group and younger do to insulate themselves or set themselves up to navigate this period as well as they can?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple things. It's not just the insulation; it's the action. So, like the natural kind of response to this is, okay, how do I protect myself?
Mhm.
Okay, how do I protect me? Um, it's the right natural reaction to this. But the bigger question is, how do I protect my community? How do I protect the nation? And for young people who are rightfully frustrated with the world right now, run for office, get involved in your local communities, whether that be showing up at council meetings, running for council, running for mayor, running for state assembly or the Senate, maybe even governor someday. Like, get into these ecosystems to make change because they're not going to happen without you there. The world doesn't, you don't want the world to happen to you. You want to
Mm,
actually change the world. At the same time, I think you should be relatively protective of your assets. um, the economy, the market is still growing at an astonishing clip. Will we have a crash like 29? Probably not, but could we see a significant devaluation in the market in the coming months or even years? Probably. So I would never suggest this for a young person today. You should always talk to a financial advisor to get the best possible advice, but you should have that conversation about what your risk profile actually is. Because I have had this conversation with my financial advisor because I sometimes feel like the wheels are coming off the bus. And for the past 2 years, he said, Brad, you're going to make 15% this year, 10 to 15% this year. And I have because I've trusted in somebody who really understands the market to make that decision for me. It's a privileged position to be in, to have that kind of person, but try to talk to a financial advisor if you can to get that basic understanding. And if your risk assessment is low, go into a low risk investment.
mhm.
Go into a low risk investment. It will not grow as fast, and this is the time you want your money to grow, but it will be a lot safer.
We talked earlier about families having less kids now than ever before. Kids' survival rate is significantly higher. They live a lot longer, but it does still seem we are well below that replenishment rate of 2.1.
Mhm.
Is there
Significantly below.
Yeah, significantly below.
Yeah.
I mean, there has to, if that stays well below that, eventually that'll just decline past a suitable point. Is there like a leveling off period that you see, or things that, or is it because we're talking about it not being Armageddon, but if it doesn't get addressed, it can become
Yeah, I mean, the
relatively
chance
bad.
the chance of getting to 0 is slim.
Yeah.
You're talking about sci-fi dystopian movies
Mm-hmm.
right now. Are we gonna hit that? I think it's unlikely because we're not necessarily talking about a mass infertility problem here. We're talking about people making a conscious choice to have or not have kids. And everyone is making that math in their head. I
Mm-hmm.
know plenty of families that have four, five, six kids.
Mm-hmm.
I know plenty of people, including myself, who have zero. It's not that people aren't having babies; it's that people are kind of doing their own math, their own equation around it, whether or not it makes sense for them. There have been nation after nation around the world that have tried to turn their birth rates around. They've done things like offer financial incentives, job protection. Um, in Russia, they'll offer you a car, which is kind of nutty.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, like there's all these things that governments are offering now as kind of bonuses to get women to have babies, but they have never really addressed the affordability question overall. They've never really kind of leaned into, the dynamic of what makes family creation work in a two-parent or a one-parent household where either both parents or the single parent has to work.
Mm-hmm.
Across the nation, there are attempts being made right now for universal childcare. That might be a step in the right direction, but just because there is universal childcare doesn't mean it's good childcare. Like it sounds great on paper, but it's not always great in practice. Certainly, affordable housing helps. I think that there are a lot of different factors that we have to take into account here. There are some signals, though, that the to some degree, the traditional family, and I always very careful to say that because we're a gay household here. Um, the traditional family of multi generations living together under one roof has been roaring back into vogue in this country, and that's largely being driven by economic factors.
Mhm.
So, for most of human history, with the exception of, let's say, the post war period up until the early 1970s, like the default was to live in a multi-generational household. You lived with your parents, your grandparents, your kids, maybe your grandkids, depending on what the longevity was in your household. We've been moving back towards that since the 1970s. Um, where at least three generations live under one roof. Now, what does that do? Well, that moves us away from the nuclear family model, which was very much more of a social model than an economic one, back to a model that is both social and economic. So everyone within the household effectively has responsibility. So the grandparents who are retired, for example, if they are retired, might take care of the grandbabies, the grandkids,
Mhm.
at least part time, or help take some of that pressure off mom and dad or a single parent. At the same time, younger adults, people your age and younger, are living at home longer.
Mhm.
So if they're living in a multi generational household, they might be taking care of their infirmed grandparents in the household. Again, taking a pressure off those income earning parents, spending a bit of their time doing that as well as earning on their own. So moving back towards that, that might help create the right conditions for people to have children again. It isn't necessarily a silver bullet, though. There are only a handful of communities in the world that have actually reversed their population decline. There's one in Japan. The name escapes me now, but they have a birth rate more than double the national average in Japan. So it's nearly three,
Mhm.
um, which is pretty astonishing in a country that has been below replacement rate for decades. So it can be done, but like all things, it will require some trade off. Like
Mhm.
men will have to contribute at home more. Both men and women will have to contribute at home more if it's a traditional male female couple.
Mhm.
Um, the idea of simply a woman working from home, I just don't think jives today, and I wouldn't even suggest it.
Hmm. Do you know what that town, that community in Japan did to help turn it
I
around?
they treated the community as a village in the sense that like everyone had a role in raising the kids. There were some financial incentives. There were healthcare protections for kids up to a certain age. Handful of other things. The structure was a bit more traditional and a little bit more patriarchal. But Japan is more patriarchal as it is, so that's
Mhm.
not really revolutionary for them. But really, everyone, I kind of think of like Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village. Like everyone was actively engaged in the raising of these children. Everyone had a role in that. And, if you think about kind of Americana and you think about the movies from like the 1940s and 1950s, everyone in the community had a pretty big role in raising kids.
Mhm.
And because of that, everyone kind of took off pressures or relieved pressures from their friends and their fellow neighbors when it was needed. Um, there was just a really interesting article out in the past week about how most people don't even really know their neighbors anymore. Like some of these are going to be, this kind of government intervention where there is a bit of a heavy hand of government coming in and helping to create the market change. But a lot of it is just like being decent humans and like what kind of a community you want to live in. And a supportive one, a connected one, tends to win out at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Uh, we are seeing an uptick in religiosity as well in America right now. That always happens when things start to get bad. There's a pretty strong correlation there. Is it fully causal? TBD. But higher religiosity societies often tend to have slightly higher birth rates as well, because there's more of a focus on family and traditional roles. Women might take a ding there from their careers as a result. LGBT people, might
Mhm.
not feel as empowered in a world where religion dominates, especially if it's um, anti them in some way. Um, but yeah, society is a constant like negotiation.
Mhm.
And we're in that negotiation right now, at least the early days of that negotiation, because we do want sustainability, right? We don't want to see humanity go away, poof. but we have to find some balance. And I argue that all the time. Like we had this explosive growth in the 20th century, like almost unsustainable
Mhm.
explosive growth in the 20th century. We don't want the opposite to happen where we have dramatic decline
Mm.
because it'll be a lot harder to manage if it is dramatic decline. A slow, easy kind of releveling of things, chef's kiss, but
Mhm.
dropping off a cliff is not good for anybody.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as you mentioned too, with more religious communities, you often see a higher uptick in childbirths,
Mhm.
which that compounds over time as well. I mean,
It can.
because
It
the other
can.
one, the non-religious is not going to have as many children, and that's going to be compounded by the increased children that the religious side has, and then that pushes more policy changes and things as well. So it's really interesting to see how things shift over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the country, I think what you find, I can tell you from the data, like the only state that has replacement rates in the country is South Dakota. I think they're still at 2.1. And on the surface, you say, "My God, what are they doing in South Dakota? It's a million people. How are they managing to do that in that state?" Um, it's not the people of European descent that are pushing up the birth rate. It's the native populations that still live, own the tribal lands there. They are responsible for the higher birth rate within that state. They have a far more traditional family structure.
Hmm.
Family is still kind of central to daily life. That's where you're finding a higher birth rate. Higher birth rates in the world exist in kind of patriarchal structured societies, societies that in many ways are still, quote unquote, developing.
Hmm.
Not the nicest term historically, but are developing. Sub-Saharan Africa, like women on average in Sub-Saharan Africa have like between 6 and 8 kids over the course of their lifetime. That's a lot of babies.
Mm.
That's a lot of babies. Um, do they all survive to adulthood? No, they don't nearly the same survival rate as they do here.
Hmm.
But the birth rate's high. So that's where we take a close look at what makes that work.
Mm. How does population and population decline affect war? Because I was listening, I was listening to somebody talk about this, and if your population is declining, your country's never going to be as powerful as it is now. If you need to make a change, you need to push now. What are your thoughts
I
on
mean,
that?
it's funny because this is something that we had studied for years because in liberal democracies, the rule of thumb was the older our countries get, the less likely we are to go to war
Mm.
because we don't have the population, we don't have the same risk tolerance that we did before because we don't have as many people that are
Hmm.
are quote unquote expendable. That held true up until an authoritarian power invaded Ukraine, and that's Russia. And Russia has a terrible demographic profile. Ukraine's is not much better. And Russia chose to invade Ukraine. China has been threatening, of course, not only Taiwan, but other territories owned by other nations currently. And they're in a similar demographic profile of decline. So this might just be something that was, kind of exclusive to liberal democracies, but authoritarian ones, it's almost like you apply capitalist thinking to them, which is a bit ironic. So when a company within a capitalist system is in decline, it is typically gobbled up or tries to gobble up other companies in order to expand its market share. That's kind of like what's happening here. It might not
Mm.
be the perfect analogy, but that's kind of what is happening here. Um, and they do their saber rattling to expand their territory because, as you said, this is our last chance to do it. So we might as well do it now. What I don't think Russia factored in, and I don't think most people did, is the role of technology and how it would play out on the battlefield. Like the role of AI, the role of drone warfare, the future of war is being built in Ukraine right now. 100% is being built in Ukraine, and it's being built because of this demographic pressure of not having enough men and women to serve on the front lines. And, in the first year of the war, the average age of a Ukrainian soldier was pushing 45.
Wow, I did not know that.
45.
Yeah.
45. Russia now allows retirees, retired military to come serve. they are enlisting prisoners and have been now for years because they need more bodies to go into the meat grinder of
Mhm.
Bakhmut. Well, what if you take humans out of the equation and you only start fighting effectively a technological war? Well, we're seeing what that is today. You're seeing
Mhm.
effectively this weird stalemate, and it's really a race to the top with tech on who might actually win this thing in the end. But it does signal the future of warfare because if we have a high risk tolerance within liberal democracies to go into war because we don't want to lose bodies, we don't want to lose people, but we're able to innovate with tech, that might be the solution to continue fighting. And that's not something that I had, fully priced in before Russia went into Ukraine a few years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, and it's kind of kind of concerning. You have all this posturing, and with this population decline, and then this administration, no new wars, and all of this, and it's just been concerning to see. And
Yeah, well, and also, we are a legacy military, and is it the strongest military on the planet? Yes. Has it dominated since the end of the Second World War? Yes. Um, but legacy militaries historically fall. Because I mean, you think about our own revolution. I mean, we're coming up on our 250th birthday here, and this scrappy little nation took out the preeminent military power in the world and declared its independence as effectively an insurgency. That could happen again. That could happen to us. And I think we've seen certainly in Iran the use of low tech. It's not completely low tech, but cheap tech, basically off the shelf type technologies. Their drone warfare has been disabling. Not completely, hasn't knocked us out cold, but it is a different type of warfare that I'm not quite sure we're fully equipped to fight.
yeah, I think I heard a lot of the drones that are coming out of Iran are just using like lawnmower engines and things, just
It's
very
possible. I mean,
yeah,
like, I've heard PS2 controllers, like,
yeah.
we're not talking about, like, these massive, multi-year tech investments that we make here in the US,
Mhm.
these, 10-year event horizons from, inception to building a new warship, for example, or even longer, because that has been the case for some of our warships. We're talking about like putting together something in months,
Mm.
months. And that agility in the face of constraint is oftentimes where you get the best innovation. Like
Mhm.
constrained resource innovation is sometimes the most impressive innovation. And the fact that you can build warfare off the shelf parts is a little concerning to me. I mean, it does concern me a bit because that means more people could have access to this, which could
Mhm.
create more disruption worldwide.
Mhm.
Um, but time will tell. This has been a
Mhm.
really interesting thing to watch as an observer because uh, quote unquote little guy in both cases has managed to really show some grit
Mm. Mm.
with the
Well,
aggressor.
Bradley, I really appreciate your time and this conversation. It's been a pleasure. I like to close off every podcast with two closing questions. The first being, who do you think I should speak to next, and why?
I certainly think if you're interested in the generational wealth transfer, you should be talking to my friend Eliza Philby. She's an author based out of London who works in generations and really understanding what this great wealth transfer means for younger people as
Mm.
the single greatest amount of money in the history of mankind moves to younger people over the coming years.
Yeah, yeah. I would definitely love to talk to her. That sounds something I'd be very interested in learning more about. My second question is, what would be a book you most recommend for me? What's something I should be reading?
Oh my god, I just finished it. I recommended it on my Instagram the other day. It's called, The Ministry for the Future. Kim Stanley Robinson is the author. It is a fascinating read about what happens as our climate really does begin to unravel in a way that
Mm.
people can actually feel. And it starts with this just horrific scene of a mass death event due to a wet bulb heat wave in India that kills millions of people. And the
Mm,
following pages are about what government and business and individuals do to effectively right the ship. It ends on a very positive note, but man, it is a roller coaster ride,
mm,
including, deception and murder and innovation in ways that really stimulate the mind. It's a
yeah.
great book. It's a great book, and one that's a hard subject, I think, for most people to get, but the way it's written, it's super, super easy, super quick, and easily digestible, and certainly has helped inform some of my own thinking.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd love to check that out. Are you familiar with Toby Ord's The Precipice?
No, I haven't read that yet.
It's a great book. He talks about he's a philosopher out of the UK, but he talked the whole premise of the book is he ranks the events that will likely occur within the next 100 years that will either
Mhm.
permanently erase humanity or permanently alter
Fun,
our potential. Yeah, yes, yes.
fun.
So he talks about like UK nuclear war, mal AI, human made pandemics and things like that. But he has a really long chapter about climate change as well, and its potential ranking. So it's a not a fun book, but an informing
I
book.
I made a note. I'm currently reading American mythology right now, something a
Mm,
bit lighter. It's about Bigfoot.
okay.
So I took a big departure from like a heavy
Yeah.
read, and I'm
Yeah.
finishing writing my book in the next few weeks. So like I wanted something to read that was a bit lighter and
Mm,
kind of took my mind off, making the hard decisions about what stays and what goes in this thing
mm,
before it's submitted to my editor.
yeah. I'm currently reading How to Hide an Empire,
Mm,
which is it's about the imperialism of the United States and how we're like our population. We don't think of those things, like we don't think of our territories that we acquired, and all of the wars we started to acquire these territories early on, and how we hid like the continental US and didn't like include those things. It's an interesting book. Well, speaking of your book, when can people expect to find your new book, and where can they find? We
yeah,
mentioned your old book a couple times, but give us
yeah.
that book
So
as well.
so the new book is called The Geography of Prosperity: A New Map of the American Dream, and it comes out next fall in 2027. But if you want to stay in touch, you could follow me on my socials, Instagram at Bradley.Sherman, TikTok at Bradley Sherman. And if you want to dive into my newsletter, which I publish weekly, it's free. It's at populationnext.com. It's on Substack.
Perfect. Well, I'll have links to both below, so listeners, you guys can just head below and click that. Well, again, Bradley, thank you so much for your time. This was an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.